Hey guys, Gare here, Onesie Angelique, my YouTube BookTube page, and I am doing a library haul video. Um, and I was going to try to do a little bit of a reading from a couple of the books, but I don't think I will. I can't really find anything really short and concise enough, and I don't want this video to just go on forever. I've got about 6 or 7 terrific books to share with you, and very excited about them. And it was so funny because I went last week to take a book back to the library, and I had 2 books waiting on me that I'll talk about first. And of course, you know, Gare has an avalanche of books at his house unread. You know, I don't need more books, but you know, I'm like, okay, I'll look around for a few minutes while I'm there. And so I come away with an armload, you know, but everything was just wonderful. I was surprised by some books that were there I just couldn't say no to. So, and as I mentioned in a recent video, sometimes I use the library to sort of test out books to see if I want to buy them. You know, even if I get the book and the library book and I read it to completion, you know, if I really love it, I still want my own copy. You know, so I'll kind of use that as a testing ground for it. One of my all-time favorite writers, and certainly one of my, let's say, top 3 or 4 contemporary writers, is a great Irish writer, Colm Tóibín. He's definitely Irish, very Irish. It almost seems, though, that calling him an Irish writer is limiting, you know, because he's just so, his scope and his depth is so profound. One of the most eloquent, one of the most eloquent people that I know, whether it's reading his books, his stories, his essays, or watching him on YouTube videos, you know, holding forth on his work and on literature of the past. He's a great one for Henry James and James Baldwin, I'm going to speak about. And what's so great about the Colm Tóibín, these are not Colm Tóibín books, but he has written the introduction, like a foreword to 2 wonderful books. And what's so wonderful about these are books and authors that I mean, they're among my favorites. You know, so to know that he has done the introduction to new editions. Basically, I've read these books, I own them, but I did not have the editions with Colm Tóibín's introductions, and I apologize again because my graphics are backwards and I don't know how to fix it. So there we are. This is L.P. Hartley's The Go-Between, which was published in 1953. And Hartley was an English writer, and I've only read 2 of his books, and I don't know why I haven't sought out his other work, but he wrote one of his best-known books is The Go-Between, which was made into a superb film in the early 70s by the director Joseph Losey, who, you know, this is a lot of the word favorite being used a lot because Tóibín is a favorite writer, Losey is a favorite director, Hartley has written a couple of his books are among my favorites. So, you know, it's just really an embarrassment of riches. But Go-Between being basically, for those of you who are not familiar with the story, the tale of a young boy who spends the summer at the estate, English country estate, with a well-to-do family, and he's staying with, I believe it's a school friend, if I remember correctly, and he becomes involved in the young lady of the house of this wealthy manor, this wealthy estate, is having an affair with I can't remember. He's a neighbor. I don't remember if he works for the family but he's a laborer. You know, or he's a or is he a blacksmith, or basically he's a laborer. He's of a different class, a very different class, and they are carrying on a clandestine affair. And the boy finds himself transporting notes in between the young lady and this man that she's having this forbidden affair with. And he's literally he's the title character. He's the go-between of the story, and it's really I think one of the great novels of the 20th century. I don't know if I would call it a masterpiece, but it's a very, very fine book, very well done, and I will highly recommend it. Tolbeen writes a superb introduction to this, as he does. Let's move right into it. This edition, this is the Everyman's Library edition of James Baldwin's 1950s novel Giovanni's Room. And Tolbeen has written the introduction to this, and what Tolbeen does so well in his introductions, as he does in all of his essays, as all wonderful essays do, he gets to the core of what the work and the author are really about, and he takes this apart in just a really brilliant, eloquent analysis. He does this in his essays and in other books, whether he's writing about, he's written other pieces about Baldwin, his many pieces about Henry James, his essays about Thomas Mann, another favorite writer. And so I would highly recommend these editions of The Go-Between and Giovanni's Room with introductions by Colm Tolbeen. Also, very interesting book. I'd heard of this book, and I had not gotten a copy of it, but there it was on the shelf. Kingdom of Olives and Ash. Writers confront the occupation, and that's the topic of the book. Is the Israeli occupation of the Palestinians that's going on. This is a collection by many marvelous authors on the occupation, and it is edited by the husband and wife writer team of Michael Chabon and Ayelet Waldman, more favorite writers, and they edited the book. They co-wrote the introduction to it, and they also each have individual essays. Colm Tolbeen also has an essay in this piece, and it features other writers such as Lorraine Adams, Geraldine Brooks, some of these names I can't pronounce, Anita Desai, let's see, Mario Vargas Llosa, Colin McCann. Well, there's several others. I think there's about 15 authors and essays altogether. But I've read several of them. It's a superb book. The authors of this book have donated the money from the sales of the book. Try to help make life a little bit less miserable for people living under the occupation. And whatever you think of what's going on there, it's tragic. And this is a very eloquent and lovely book and very interesting. So I highly recommend Kingdom of Olives and Ash. I think the centerpiece of my books that I got at the library, I'd had this on reserve at the library and actually have my copy of it on my way to me from Amazon. This is called The Bug House: The Poetry, Politics, and Madness of Ezra Pound by Daniel Swift. Swift has written an account of, for those of you who don't know, Ezra Pound was one of the brilliant literary voices, poets of the 20th century. Famous for his 50 years he spent writing a collection called the Cantos. and very controversial figure. Um, he's it's hard to know. There's so much to say about Pound, but he was instrumental in helping uh, T.S. Eliot in his work, The Wasteland. It's a very famous poem, one of the most famous poems of all time. I helped him edit that. I know that he helped get um, Ulysses published, and of course, he was working on his own poetry at the same time. Controversial, to say the least. In the early days, Pound lived decades of his life in Italy. I moved around Europe quite a bit and lived in Italy for decades. In 1941, Pound began giving radio pro-fascist radio broadcasts, basically um, supportive of Hitler, supportive of Mussolini, anti-American, really vile. These some of these broadcasts are on YouTube. You can just type in Ezra Pound YouTube broadcast, and you will hear them. And I think most of you will agree that they're pretty vile. They're pretty disgusting. So Pound is interesting, fascinating actually, because this is an instance of what do you do when you have someone who is a brilliant poet and they have these pretty disgusting opinion, anti-Semitic, but he was really like a man of incredible contradictions. The contradictions are just one right after another. You know, he was a racist. Little doubt that he was a racist, and yet he thought somehow like the truth of the world was, how the book puts it, I should have marked the quotes, that the truth of life and the world could be found in Africa. I mean, there's just you make these outrageous, horrible comments and then, make some startling contradiction. But he was arrested at the end of the war, and he was imprisoned in Italy he was actually kept in a cage for a while. He was brought to the United States, and he was put into a mental institution, St. Elizabeth Hospital, which is in, is it Baltimore, Maryland? I'm not sure. It's in Maryland. I could look it up, but St. Elizabeth Hospital, and he was there for 12 years. It was determined that he was insane or I don't know, paranoid, schizophrenic, delusional, and there's quite a bit of evidence that the government preferred to. He was basically being tried for treason, and the penalty for treason was death, was execution. And it was basically thought that this was to put him in the mental institution. The government really didn't want to get into executing one of our great poets, and however repugnant the broadcasts were. And he spent 12 years at St. Elizabeth's, which apparently, and I haven't got to this where they talk about it, apparently was what he referred to as the bug house. And he was visited by very many famous writers and poets and people who are interested in him. And this is an account of his time at St. Elizabeth's, and it's very interesting. I'm about maybe, I don't know, 40% into it, and it's just really a very fine, interesting book, contradictory, fascinating, controversial to say the least. Book. So, The Bug House by Daniel Swift. I do recommend it. Completely stumbled upon two books of poetry, the poems of Hart Crane, and this is like a collected edition, and I couldn't really decide which one that I wanted to read, so I won't be reading one from it. Another writer, a poet that I like very much, Charles Simic. This is his collection, Selected Late and New Poems, and it's called The Voice at 3 a.m. Very fine, one of our finest poets, Charles Simic. And last but not least, The Rub of Time, which is a collection, the latest collection of essays just published by Martin Amis, and Martin Amis being the son of the famous writer Kingsley Amis, and he has written many, very fine, distinguished writer for decades in his own right. One of our public literary intellectuals, and this is called The Rub of Time. Bellow, Nabokov, Hitchens, Travolta, Trump, Essays and Reportage, 1994 to 2017. I really love it when Amis writes about Nabokov and or Nabokov, I'm not sure, but I believe you pronounce it Nabokov. I really love his essays, of which he's written numerous. He really needs to collect those. When he writes on Nabokov and when he writes on Larkin, the poet Philip Larkin, who he's very enamored with. So I highly recommend this as well. So, Colm Tóibín, Martin Amis, Charles Simic, Hart Crane, Ezra Pound, crazy old Ezra Pound, Writers Confronting the Occupation, L.P. Hartley, The Go-Between, Giovanni's Room, James Baldwin, Colm Tóibín, and 3 of these books. So quite a good library haul. So talk about how you use the library below and what books that you're reading right now. And I hope you enjoy the video. And all of you guys take good care.